I've brought on a bevy of guest hosts to help me tackle a topic I've been wanting to do since the very beginning: the dubious proclamations and legacy of Sigmund Freud. Psychiatry is arguably the least science-based of the medical specialties, and Freudian psychoanalysis arguably the least science-based of those. The father of psychoanalysis, Freud's impact on 20th century thought is undeniable, even though he got almost everything wrong. My name's Moxie, and this is your Brain on Facts. Let's start from the beginning, which is a very good place to start. For some background on the man himself, please welcome our first guest presenter.
Hi, this is Emily Prokop from the podcast The Story Behind, The Extraordinary History of the Ordinary, and this is the story behind Sigmund Freud. On May 6, 1856, Sigmund Freud was born. He was one of 8 children to Jacob Freud, who was a wool merchant, and Amalia Nathanson, who was Jacob's third wife. Although his family were Hasidic Jews, Sigismund, or Sigmund as he became known, didn't practice. When Sigmund was 4, his family moved from what is now known as the Czech Republic to Vienna, Austria, where he ended up staying to study medicine at the University of Vienna. He began studying the anatomy of the brain, including the effects of cocaine, before the dangers were as widely known as they are today. He moved away from that, but still used it occasionally for his migraines and as self-medication for his depression. He began working as a clinical assistant, then moved on to studying psychiatry. When he met physician and physiologist Joseph Breuer, he learned about hypnosis for use on patients suffering from hysteria. He watched as patients would come into Breuer, get hypnotized, and then were able to talk through experiences they wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And at the end, the patients would feel much better. Freud was fascinated with this, and after traveling to study hypnosis some more, returned to Vienna to open his own practice in 1886. He soon realized that many of his patients didn't need hypnosis, though, but that they just needed an open space to talk. It helped that they could lay on a couch and didn't have to see Freud taking notes next to them. The couch is a fairly well-known trope for therapists in movies and television, but Freud had originally used it to help put people into hypnosis, and it had originated when a patient gifted him one. He also coined the term psychoanalysis for his way of allowing patients to talk about anything that entered their brains. He began developing theories we still learn about today, like the id, ego, and superego, as well as the Oedipus complex. And if you're still in the dark about whether you've heard of Freud or not, you might have heard of Freudian slips, the situation when you mistakenly say something you didn't mean to, but was actually an underlying truth instead. Like when I say, I'm just going to have 30 pieces of chocolate. Oops, I meant 3. He was also known to study dreams, believing that they held the key to people's deepest desires. His most famous book, The Interpretation of Dreams, wasn't a big seller when it was first released in 1899. It only sold 351 copies in the first 6 years. He became a professor at the University of Vienna and began attracting others interested in learning about the complexities of the brain, including Carl Jung. His group was called the Psychoanalytic Society, and soon other chapters followed in other cities. But as World War II loomed, Freud kept him and his family in Austria as long as possible. Although by 1933, Nazis began burning his books because even though he is said to have been an atheist, he was still of Jewish heritage. By 1938, he and his family had run into problems with the Gestapo in Austria and left for England. He had married Martha Bernays back in 1882 and went on to father 6 children with her. He also began smoking in his 20s, believing the habit increased his productivity, but it became a lifelong addiction, even after doctors found a cancerous tumor inside his mouth when he was in his 60s. His mouth cancer became inoperable, and on September 21st, 1939, he asked his colleague and fellow doctor, Max Schur, to end his suffering. He received 3 heavy doses of morphine, slipped into a coma, and died.
Thanks, Emily. If my listener enjoys hearing the surprising origins of everyday items, you'll definitely want to check out The Story Behind. Sigmund Freud was also a serious polyglot, meaning someone who speaks multiple languages. He had a strong knowledge of German, Italian, Greek, English, Spanish, Hebrew, and Latin, making those of us who got a C in high school French look pretty shabby. It's also been said that he was already reading Shakespeare at the age of 8. Whatever else is said today, no one will be impugning Freud's intellectual capacity. Although he didn't keep his Jewish faith, Freud became a particular target of the Nazis when they rose to power. His books were among those banned in 1933, which caused him to snark, "What progress we are making! In the Middle Ages, they would have burnt me. Nowadays, they are content with burning my books." After Germany annexed Austria, the Nazis raided Freud's apartment and the Gestapo detained and interrogated his daughter Anna. With the assistance of his friend and patient, Princess Marie Bonaparte, a reluctant Freud fled to Paris and then to London with his wife and daughter. Sadly, Bonaparte could not obtain exit visas for 4 of Freud's sisters, who would tragically die in the concentration camps. Their deaths were beyond their control, but Freud's wasn't. Freud smoked as many as 20 cigars a day, every day. He was quoted as saying that the cigars were essential to his life, that they improved his work. There's a popular story that one of Freud's students suggested that perhaps his constant need to have a cigar in his mouth meant that he had an oral fixation, a disorder that he had postulated, which we'll get into shortly. To this, Freud famously replied, "Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar." Except he probably didn't. This deflective response was first documented in 1950, 30 years after it was supposedly said, but there are no other references to it to be found in those 3 decades. After the discovery of a cancerous tumor inside Freud's mouth in 1923, doctors removed a large part of his jaw. Although he underwent 33 additional surgeries over the next 16 years and had to have a prosthesis inserted to separate his sinus from his jaw, Freud never stopped smoking. So maybe we will question his smarts, just a little bit. In addition to tobacco, Freud was a big fan and proponent of cocaine, even bigger than Eric Clapton. In the 1880s, Freud grew interested in a drug being used by a German military doctor to rejuvenate exhausted troops. He distributed doses of cocaine to his friends and future wife and touted the drug's therapeutic benefits in an 1884 paper on coca, which he called "A Song of Praise to This Magical Substance." However, when Freud gave cocaine to close friend Ernst von Fleischl-Marxau to wean him from his morphine addiction and relieve pain, his friend instead developed a serious cocaine addiction. With news of other addictions and overdose deaths spreading, Freud stopped advocating cocaine's medicinal benefits, but continued to use the drug for migraines, depression, and nasal inflammation. For those who don't know, snorting cocaine through a nose that's inflamed by cocaine is a bad idea, to the degree that it can cause tissue death or necrosis. Freud treated this tissue necrosis with more cocaine. His writings on the benefits of cocaine have been called into serious question, as he referenced successful outcomes of patients who don't seem to have existed. He published a scientific study on the physiological effects of cocaine on reaction time and muscle strength. His only experimental subject was himself. In his write-up, he tried to explain away his failure to test other subjects, and then claimed he had confirmed his results by testing colleagues, which also cannot be proved. The study was riddled with methodological flaws, and as one biographer commented, may rank among the most careless research studies ever to see print.